WLIW FM In Conversation, our special program that brings you dynamic voices from across our region and beyond.
Welcome to WLIW FM In Conversation. I'm your host, Diane Micheli, General Manager of WLIW FM. Joining me are Paint Me a Road Out of Here, documentary film director Katherine Gund, and executive producer and artist Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter, who also is featured in the film. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure to be here.
Katherine, let's start with telling us the journey story of the film and the story told in Paint Me a Road Out of Here.
Well, it's kind of a long story, but a short moment when it finally came to pass, because it involves all the work and experience that Mary had building up to this moment, work that I was also doing for decades in an anti-carceral, decarceration, abolitionist environment with media. And it just came together when we realized there was this Faith Ringgold painting sort of behind plexiglass, hidden in a corner of jail on Rikers Island in New York City. And suddenly the idea of figuring out how it got there and why led to us discovering this incredible story that actually moved us to work together, Mary and I, and so many others, the government, faith, the prison system, artists, activists, donors, all these people working together to continue the effort that Faith had begun in 1970 to paint women a road out of jail.
So, Mary, how did you become involved in the real life story told in Paint Me a Road Out of Here and subsequently the film itself?
Well, I think Katherine alluded to it a little bit earlier. I had been working with incarcerated folks through collaboration with the Independence Fund and Mural Arts Philadelphia since the winter of 2019. So I was, very familiar, as a teaching artist about the power of art and how transformative it could be in the everyday lives of people that get an opportunity and the resources to experience it. And had been involved in a collaboration with Riverside Correctional Facility, the jail where I was incarcerated at, and working on a community collaborative mural called Reimagining Dignity, a love letter to ourselves, which focused on the power of affirmation. It's not only, a daily practice to reimagine yourself, within incarceration, but then also a life outside of it. But also a way to give back and to be who I would have, wanted while I was incarcerated there, to give me a sliver of hope, just to press forward. So I think my work with incarcerated people, in this capacity around mural collaboration was just in alignment with what Faith had already done, and what we, began to hash out amongst ourselves and saw as a viable opportunity for the folks incarcerated on Rikers Island.
Mary, for those who are not familiar with Faith Ringgold's painting, can you describe what the painting depicts? And when you look at it, what do you see?
Right. I think what's just beautiful about that work is that, she did that in 1971, but how it correlates with my own practice in terms of affirmation, right? Those were actually visual affirmations that Faith had painted in collaboration with the folks there about what was possible for women, not only, within a carceral setting, but in larger society that just wasn't supported, right? So I think in that way, it was just a beautiful through line between our practices. And for me, painting me a road out of here is not only about abolition and ending mass incarceration, getting people out of the throes of poverty, but also all of these other oppressive systems that we need to paint our roads, we need to reimagine, so that we all can live, in equity and be all contributing citizens to this place, we call the world, and make it better. So Paint Me a Road Out of Here is just not about a painting, right? It's not about, after the film ends, we clap, we say hooray. It's, we do that, but then also we do that in tandem with, we need to also get to work. And I think over the last couple of weeks with the new administration, we even see, a deeper need for that.
So, Catherine, there's a story to how the painting came to be, which is a part of the film.
The film looks at the history of Faith's experience in the art world, in the Black Power movement, in the women's movement, which is primarily white women's movement, and sort of how she carved out a space for herself and her voice there. And in 1970, she got a small grant to do a public art piece and offered to give it to the CUNY, where she had been a student, an art teaching student, because they wouldn't let her be an art student because that was only for men. And she offered it to them and they said no. And she thought, well, where can I just give my work? I mean, now her work is some of the most important work of the last 100 years. And, it's at the National Gallery, it's at the Museum of Modern Art, it's collected all over the world. And she went to the women's jail and said, what would you like me to paint? Along the lines of what Mary was saying in terms of affirmation. And something that would lift them up, that would give them the energy to keep going, give them healing. The question of part of the question in the film is there room for poetry in catastrophe? And, the answer really is, can you endure catastrophe without poetry, without art, without painting that will give you healing, give you transformation, and give you the power to imagine a change, a different future. And so one of the women said to her, paint me a road out of here. So the painting is actually called For the Women's House, which was the name of the jail at that time. And she made the painting and it depicted things women on the outside couldn't even do. It's her last oil painting on canvas. After that, she ended up turning to things that were less expensive, that she could move more easily, that were more accessible to more people, like the quilts and the dolls and children's books. And those ended up becoming puzzles and things like that. But the quilts are very important. And Mary has a moment in the film when she's with the quilts, which were all gathered at the New Museum for the first retrospective. Anyway, but this painting was in the show, which was pretty exciting. It became to us kind of a parable, because once we got this idea of paint a road out, it was very important to Mary and me and everyone involved that this was not about freeing a painting. This project of getting the painting out and making the movie, and Mary agreeing to go into Rikers and make a new piece with women who've been through 50 years of generational trauma and mass incarceration and all kinds of devastation and oppression that didn't already exist at that point. It was different at that point. And it was important to all of us that this remain a project of painting the women a road out. And it became very clear to us that if we took the lessons from how we got the painting out of the jail and in on parole into the Brooklyn Museum, that if we applied those same lessons to working to decarcerate and non-incarcerate, really towards an abolitionist vision, however far one can go on that imagination, that the only way to get there was to apply these ideas about value, because people are so undervalued who are caged. And the painting was undervalued. When they found out it was worth millions of dollars, they paid attention to it. Value, having a plan, having a community, responsible all together. Like I said earlier, you can't do it without the philanthropists, without the activists, without the artists. You really cannot do it without all those parts. And arguably in this case, without the prison, the jail commissioners, without the government, even if it's local at this point. I don't know what we can do with the government now, but you need that. You need an accountability. You need someone to step up and say they're responsible for it. And you need urgency. You need to say, this is not okay. This is not okay for another day. We had 2 weeks to do this. And instead of saying someday we'll figure out how to close Rikers, we need to say, you've got 2 months now. Do it. Get people out.
Yeah, I'll just add on a little bit more about the painting, the fact that it's such a prophetic piece, right? All of those archetypes of what females couldn't do have all come to pass. I mean, we have women police officers, we have women doctors, we have women drummers, we have the WNBA where we have professional basketball players who are women. We didn't get the presidency of a woman, but she was nominated, right? And she also served as a vice president. So the power and just always being ahead of her time is just something I truly appreciate about Faith and her legacy and all she's given us.
So the painting was at Rikers for how long? And then I think it got painted over. And what's the history of the painting and its journey and how it was rescued? Who are the heroes? How did that all, what is that story?
Well, I believe it was a correction officer by the name of Barbara. She looked forward to interacting with the painting on a daily. So one day she went to work and, went to have her daily meditation at the painting, and it wasn't there. And she proceeded to, go around the prison and ask around, what happened to the painting? And it ultimately came down to her finding it in the basement and realizing that the painting had been whitewashed, essentially, and painted over, which at that point she went to the Schomburg, looked up Faith Ringgold, and contacted her and, let her know, gave her some urgency, you better come get this painting because they're trying to destroy it. And then Faith, then followed up with all of her advocacy and contacting the warden and whoever she could to get funds to restore the painting. Because luckily, it was water-based, right? So the masterpiece underneath wasn't destroyed. They met, I think it took over a year of advocacy efforts and then finally getting the painting to some conservators and getting them to remove the white paint. But, ultimately when the painting was complete and completely restored and they brought it back to the prison, they placed it in a gymnasium about 15 feet in the air. And then, it became a prison inside of a prison, right? And the women were no longer able, to interact with the painting. It never got the opportunity to function as it originally had in terms of this source of inspiration and beauty. And that, I guess, also started these other interventions that Faith, was inspired to do to get the painting out of there and get it back into the public so that it could function the way that it was supposed to.
Seems like a pretty daunting process, Catherine.
Getting the painting out altogether. Yes. Well, yes. It's an amazing story. It really was 50 years pretty much to the month. From when she had put it in, it was 25 years till it got painted over. And Barbara Drummond, the correction officer, that's a beautiful retelling of how it went, because she really is the crux of the sort of detective part of the film, which is what happened to this painting? How did it end up in this situation? And what was its journey? And if it weren't for her, it wouldn't exist today. But then once it went back and was in the basketball court behind plexiglass, and then it got moved to an administrative hallway, it just was never, Faith wanted it back and it was never given back to her and it was never treated as it should have been.
Especially after the abuse it endured, right? That was one thing that triggered Faith to no, you don't deserve it. You're not protecting it. You're not allowing it to function in the manner that we all agreed on. And, with that, I need it back.
And it did happen that the painting was removed from Rikers, and now it's at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. Is that correct? And that happened. Faith Ringgold passed away recently, but that happened before. So Faith saw that, realized.
Yes, she absolutely did. And part of the way of doing that relates to how Mary and I really see this story and the importance of this journey, which is that by working with the jail system to make sure that Mary, an experienced artist, who's worked within the carceral system, doing art within the jail programs, that she, as a formerly incarcerated artist who had that experience, could go in and keep working with the women. It was almost like move the painting so we can make room for Mary and additional work to happen. The painting is only on a 10-year loan. That's why we say it's on parole. It's still owned by the city/jail system. And who knows? I mean, they are creating new jails. They're doing these community-based jails to try to close Rikers. And somehow they've started to recognize there's so many important, impactful, formerly incarcerated and system impacted artists that they're starting to see that art really has a role in both changing our minds so that people on the outside who aren't incarcerated change how they think about the system, but also can help provide healing or meditation or space. So they want art now and artists to be involved, but they don't work together actually very well. So even having the painting inside, it wasn't like it was benefiting the women, which some women who'd been incarcerated with it talk about in the film. They say that, I never was able to sit and look and experience and think about and meditate in front of and talk to people about it and return to it and engage with this painting the way that art needs to be engaged with. So if you can't do that in a prison environment, what is the purpose? How does the art have to either change or the environment change to make that kind of a connection possible? And so it's hard to imagine that painting having any impact like the kind we're talking about within a carceral facility at this point. Mm-hmm. So we really don't want to see it go back.
This is WLIW-FM in Conversation. I'm your host, Diane Michelli, speaking with Paint Me a Road Out of Here documentary film director Katherine Gund and executive producer and artist Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter, who also is featured in the film. And Mary, to that point, what is your work that you're doing now in this space? You went back there to Rikers. You talked about working in jails elsewhere. What is the work that you're doing to try to further what Katherine just talked about in terms of art having a place in this conversation and in the lives of women who are incarcerated and anyone who's incarcerated?
Right. Well, unfortunately, after, completing all of my trainings and, all of the bureaucracy and paperwork behind the scenes to even enter Rikers Island, mm-hmm. I never was granted access. I mean, over a year, we went back and forth and back and forth. And then ultimately, I kind of came to the realization, kind of what Katherine alluded to, was that me going in to do, this artwork on this small timeline, whereas, the folks inside won't get a chance to really engage with it, sit with it, appreciate it. I would kind of be doing the same thing that Faith Ringgold did, right? And what she was trying to undo and what we all band together to assist her in. So, if it's not about a long-term, program where there can be a series of artists that can continue doing engagement with folks, I don't see the benefit, right? We're not trying to create beauty in a place of violence, to distract that it's violent, right? If we're not investing in these people to become artists, figuring out pathways, we have the Center for Art and Advocacy that's going to launch pretty soon in New York, where, they're waiting to bring in artists from carceral settings that have been just as impacted, to mentor them, to, provide funds, to, help them establish themselves as artists and develop their art careers. If we're not doing that long-term work, then I think overall it'll be more harmful than helpful.
And there's a scene in the film with you, Mary, where I think you have a conversation with Faith Ringgold. Is that correct? And yes. Can you tell us about that conversation and who she was to you?
Wow. Just deeply, in gratitude, for this whole process. I mean, without being able to participate in this film and be a collaborator alongside Catherine. I would have never got an opportunity to meet Faith, right? And really to sit at her feet and take in all of the years of experience, wisdom, love, humor, joy that she had to give. But basically during that meeting, there was a passing of the baton. And, there was this assertion that the work is not done, and that she was counting on me to carry it forward. So, with great reward comes huge responsibility, and I don't take it lightly. And I'm just carrying that with me. I already knew within my practice, largely because it's autobiographical, the importance of your story. But, being able to study her work and be in community with her, I see the importance of that more than ever. And I mean, I just can't believe it that I got an opportunity to work alongside Faith Ringgold. And it's something that, it just inspires me on a daily. And I'm just thankful for everyone that made it, possible.
That's wonderful. And Catherine, what do you hope audiences take away from Paint Me a Road out of here? And where can they get information about seeing the film?
Well, I hope people take away the inspiration, motivation, activation to continue the work of justice and fairness and creating an environment where all people are treated, because they are created, are treated equally and fairly and with celebration and with the possibility that people can make their contributions. And thrive. And we do not live in that kind of place, whether it's, all the detainees who are now going to be sent to Guantanamo Bay or, whatever it is. And so I do hope people take that away, but I hope they take it away with a real joy and, a sort of inner love and passion for the work. I mean, Faith was hilariously funny. She was incredibly patient. She was making art up until the very end of her life, but she also really understood that artists like Mary were coming up in a different environment, and she knew how to make space for that while not underestimating the importance of her own participation and contribution to that discussion. And I think it's really shown in that one conversation out on the porch, and they have big ideas they share and smaller ideas. I love the moment when Mary says to her, "How did you do it? I have a son, I have a husband, I have a family, I have to travel, I have to do this, I have to do that." And Faith says, I don't know, because I never had the opportunity. Nobody was ever inviting me to anything. No one was showing my work. I just went to my studio and made work and then went home with my daughters. And that's a real change, and one that Mary can grapple with, but that she also had room to say. She turns to Mary at one point and says, "I have no idea what prison is like now." And Mary said, "It's the most violent place. It's the most violent place." And so she was able to see that is actually very different from when she was there in the 70s. But I do want to say, yes, please come see the film. We open at Film Forum on Houston and 7th Avenue in Manhattan on Friday. It will be there, come opening weekend. That's always the most important for films. They can extend it if a lot of people are coming. It'll be there for a couple of weeks. Mary and I will be there for Q&As. I know our first one is already sold out, which is great. Saturday, there's one on the 8th, and there's one on the 13th, which I believe may also be sold out. And there will be a couple of more, but they're 4 and 5 times a day, the screenings. And, people are out of practice of going to movie theaters right now. And it still brings the magic. You sit and watch. It's not on a small screen. You're with some other people you might not know. Everyone's quiet and paying attention, and you're sort of breathing together and spending that kind of, Quaker meeting time where you're just in communion with people and able to take in the information and the beauty and the journey in a different way.
Can they get information about the film and about where to see it on your website or?
Yes. There is a Film Forum has a website that sells tickets and has all the information. There is a trailer online, Paint Me Road Out of Here trailer. And there's already some press coming out, which we're excited about. There was a wonderful article in Teen Vogue a while ago, and then Brooklyn Rail just came out a couple days ago. We're going to be doing a couple more radio shows, which is exciting for us. There's going to be some press that'll help people contextualize, get the word out. But yes, we have an auburnpictures.com, also paintmeroadfilm.com. There's a lot of ways to find out about it out online. And Mary, do you want to talk about some of the ways people can see your work, at least online?
Sure. I mean, you can Google Ain't I a Woman on YouTube, Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter, but also you can find it through my hip hop name, Isis the Savior. Where else can you find? I mean, if you just Google my name, there's tons of articles. There's also books out. I recently had some work featured in a Four Freedoms book. I was going to grab it real quick, but I don't want to distract. Where do we go from here? I did an exhibition in 2023 in collaboration with Micheline Thomas and a ton of amazing artists, Portrait of an Unlikely Space. There's a text there. There's an intro to visual communication book that NYU is teaching that features my work. So there's lots of places you can access me. You can also invite me to come lecture at your college or university. I'm available.
Well, I can't thank you both enough. This is a wonderful conversation, important topic, an important film. Thank you both for your work and for sharing the story and for joining us on WLIW-FM.
Thank you, Diane.
Thanks for having us. And I just last shout out would be to Mary for joining in on a film like this, to be able to share so much of herself, her work, her family, her experiences, because I think when you just heard in the way that her work is, how it's made, she's conceptual in a certain way, you're conceptual in a certain way, but there's another way. It's just so present and so meaningful and significant. And I appreciate the art and then a film of art and then the ongoing conversation and then conversations like this. So thank you both for focusing on this project.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Mary. I've been speaking with Paint Me a Road Out of Here documentary film director Catherine Gund and executive producer and artist Mary Enoch Elizabeth Baxter, who also is featured in the film. More episodes of WLIW-FM in Conversation are available on the WLIW-FM app at wliw.org/radio and your favorite streaming platforms, including YouTube. And follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at WLIW-FM. I'm your host, Diane Michelli, General Manager of WLIW-FM. Thanks for joining us for this latest episode of WLIW-FM in Conversation.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of WLIW-FM in Conversation, our special program that brings you dynamic voices from across our region and beyond.